Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
All right. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm not sure why. I've just decided now this is my new thing, John. I'm just going to do the Matthew McConaughey thing. I'm just going to lean into it fully. All right. We're glad you're here. Welcome to This Is Not Church, the podcast. Hey, how about that, John? We'll give it that. This Is Not Church, the podcast. Soon to be followed by This Is Not Church, the coffee mug. And also the T-shirt. Yeah, we have those too. So anyway, we are. My name is Nat. I am one of your hosts. As always, you get two hosts for the price of one. My brother John, up in the hills of Northern California, amongst the pot growers and the cattle farmers. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
See, this is the problem. This is why you're just surrounded by beef and weed. So you say
that like it's a bad thing.
No, it just explains an awful lot. So
I'm going to go smoke a J and go cow tipping.
Oh, he goes the other way. I thought you smoked the cow and tipped the joint. Does he smoke? I've had some of your smoked tri-tip, man. It's all right. You know how to smoke a cow. So it is intoxicating.
All right.
All right. I'm going to stop now. Stop it. I'm really excited to introduce our next guest. I'm going to read through their bio real quick. And again, as always, this doesn't come anywhere close to encapsulating the person. I just want to give you a little bit of a background before we jump into conversation. So our guest today is Dr. Robyn Henderson-Espinoza. Let me read this the way I wrote it. So Dr. Robyn Espinoza, I didn't write this. Let me read this the way I stole it from their Amazon site. Dr. Robyn Henderson-Espinoza is a TransQueer Activist, Latinx Scholar, and a politicized theologian working in the borderlands of church and faith communities, social change movements, and higher education institutions. Important to note about Dr. Robyn is that they are non-binary, transgender Latinx who are trained as a constructive philosophical theologian and holds a PhD in religion from the University of Denver. They attended seminary at Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary on the campus of Northwestern University, Chicago. Dr. Robyn teaches in the field of theology and ethics, while also is engaged in the work of social change by participating in varying social justice projects. Dr. Robyn is the founder of the Activist Theology Project, a collaborative project working to incubate sustainable change in innovative ways using advocacy, art, semantics, and storytelling. All right. And I hope that us making light of the way I said this does not undermine the gravity of all the great work that you're doing. Welcome, Dr. Robyn. We appreciate you being here.
Thank y'all so much. I kind of wish that we were in Northern California smoking tri-tip and smoking a joint together.
Yeah, for real, right? I mean, like, because
that would be a podcast. That would be a podcast.
That would be what I'd watch, right? It'd be like just a bunch of people sitting around a campfire somewhere, smoking tri-tip and maybe, hitting that blunt here and there. Yeah. Says the pastor of the small church. I'm kidding. Parishioners, I would never. Anyway, so
I'm not laughing.
Is Dr. Robyn something you go by? Is that it's in your bio? I didn't know if that was something that you use like for real, or are we just being clever?
Yeah. No. I mean, I utilize that PhD because maybe I'm just a person from Texas, trained in West Texas, moved to the big city of Chicago, and then found myself with a PhD. So I try to use it for good.
Absolutely.
And when I am talking with the dominant culture and like cis white men, let's level the playing field. I'm Dr. Robyn and you're pastor or Mr. And, let's use those titles for good, but let's not use them in a way to marginalize people or oppress people.
Absolutely, yeah. So that, I mean, and you obviously worked your tail off to get your PhD from Northwestern. That's no small feat,
right?
So you're deserving of any honorific that goes along with that. So, from a guy who barely got a bachelor's degree from University of Maryland, I tip my hat to anyone who has gone on to higher education. So
thank you.
I appreciate all that. So I just wanted to say that first off. John and I have purposed, as we said offline, for the very beginning when we conceived of this podcast, we said we would seek out and search out a diversity of perspectives that we would try our very, very best to give voice to people who maybe don't have a voice as often, and to use what little bit of platform we have to push some things and to educate people, and I think that's important. So with that being said, I'll ask you the same question we ask all of our guests, except when I forget and they have to remind me, Carolyn Whitney Brown, who was like, aren't you going to ask me about that? But if you wouldn't mind, if you just kind of give us a little rundown, a little snapshot of your faith journey, kind of where you've come from, where you find yourself heading, anything you think is pertinent would be great.
Yeah. So, I first have to say I was born to a Mexican woman, not of this country, and an Anglo man, which makes me a mixed race Latinx. And when I was very young, my Mexican mother, Whataburger. I love Whataburger.
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw that in your face.
And they said it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're from Texas and they know Whataburger is not what it's. Yeah, so y'all don't have Whataburger in.
We do. They just opened one not far from my house. Yeah.
Glory, hallelujah.
Yeah.
All you need now is an In-N-Out and you'd be set for life.
Exactly.
Sorry, I didn't mean to distract you with my giant Whataburger cup, my 86-ounce drink.
Yeah, I digress. So when I was very young, my Mexican mother wanted me to have the best education possible. And so she sent me to Catholic school. And she took a lot of heed from my family for this because I think my family feared that I would be indoctrinated. And so, my faith journey was very much shaped by being in Catholic school, by attending Mass 3 times a week. But I also had a come to Jesus moment at a small Southern Baptist church in Longview, Texas, which is where I was born and lived for 12 years. And was baptized at Macedonia Baptist Church. And so I had kind of this dual experience of going to Catholic school Monday through Friday and Mass 3 times a week, and the Macedonia Baptist Church on Wednesday and Sundays. And when I was 12, I moved to live with my white father in San Antonio, Texas, and wanted to go to church, but he liked to have a beer every once in a while. So he didn't want to go to the Baptist church because Baptists don't drink, dance, smoke, or anything else, play cards.
Right.
So we went to the Lutheran church, and then I was confirmed Lutheran. So if you ask people, technically I'm Lutheran because I was confirmed in the Lutheran tradition. But really my tradition is Baptist with a small b. And I stayed connected to the Baptist church throughout high school, went back when I was in high school to the Baptist church, had a great youth minister, felt a call to ministry, but because I have a vagina, that wasn't acceptable. And, went on to study theology and philosophy as an undergraduate student and still felt the call to, study and nurture that. But, because, I was also coming out as queer and I was also dealing with my racial identity as a mixed race Latinx. And my faith journey was one where I was socialized in conservative white evangelicalism, but my intuition was that church was more than that. But because I was surrounded by a lot of white people doing white evangelicalism, and like I went to college, for example, with Matt Chandler, who is the pastor at the Village Church in the Dallas metro area. But he led Grace Bible Study for a long time. And so like Matt and I were in class together. And so I saw very up close how charismatic white men were applauded for their gifts, but people who thought deeply or who were curious about stuff were demonized.
Yeah.
And I was one of those curious people who, I was just very curious about the things that I was learning. And I would carry around these stacks of books by feminist theologians because I needed other witnesses in the class with me. I needed other voices in the class with me other than cis white straight men. And I was dealing with my gender at the time and trying to figure out, like, I don't feel woman or female, but I don't feel male or man. And I didn't have access to the language of transgender until I moved to Chicago for seminary. And then I was like, I don't feel straight, but I don't feel gay. And I was introduced to this language of queer, where for me, it was about an orientation to difference. So that's all part of my faith journey, that, like my gender and sexuality was happening at the same time as I was studying theology and ethics. And I just, when I left Texas, I was in West Texas for about 6 years. And when I left West Texas and moved to Chicago, I just decided to leave the church because I was like, it's enough. I've had enough. No more bullshit. I'm just going to study. And I fell in love with studying and fell in love with the tradition. And there was a real beauty to what I was studying. But when I was in the local church, I couldn't see that beauty. I couldn't find that beauty. So I kept leaving.
So you find yourself in Chicago. I think that's a really interesting intersection, though. Thank God you didn't decide to go like Dallas Theological Seminary or something.
Right.
So as you're wrestling with these issues of gender and sexuality and all this other stuff, thank God at least you were at Northwestern.
Yeah.
Where, I'm not sure. I'm sure it wasn't uber friendly, but it had to have been much better than a very conservative seminary or Bible school would have been.
Yeah. Interestingly, the Garrett Seminary, which is on the campus of Northwestern, is a United Methodist seminary. And if you know anything about United Methodists, they are struggling with the gender and sexuality issue even to this day.
Oh, they're going to split over it at some point, I think. Yeah.
And so, 20 years ago when I was in seminary, it was pretty hostile. And I was closeted to an extent. I just didn't talk about my personal life when I was on campus, but I was out in the rest of my life. It was a very bifurcated life, but I didn't feel safe, and I was there to study. I wasn't there to make friends necessarily. And so I just sort of sucked it up and did it the way I thought I should do it, because there's this thing like when you're becoming a scholar, you learn how to play the game. It's a chess game, and I figured out how to play the game. And for me, that was to silence the parts of me that were screaming the loudest. And you learn how to code switch, and you learn how to answer the questions in a certain way that you're telling the truth, but you're not telling the whole truth. And I remember sitting in class one day, and my advisor, who was my favorite teacher, she said, if the eunuch can be baptized, then LGBTQ people are affirmed. And that was all I needed to be okay with myself.
Well, let's talk about that for a second too, because I have heard, and you're a seminary student, so your knowledge of this would likely be much better than mine. But I have heard from some scholars that the term eunuch in Scripture is a very nondescript kind of word. It doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means, and so a lot of us have that term, and we have a very specific definition, but it was sort of broadly like someone who just didn't fit into normal sexual gender roles or whatever. Right. So it could have been anything from an actual physical eunuch to somebody who was effeminate or somebody, and they were barred from temple life.
Right.
Period. So Jesus, so the eunuch being baptized should have spoken volumes about the inclusivity of the gospel, right?
Right. But when we don't consider context, and when we just are hell-bent on a literal interpretation, we can harm people and we can weaponize Scripture against people. And I think what I learned as a student of the tradition and a student of the Christian Scriptures is that context matters and lived experience matters. And when we ignore those things, bad theology kills. And I think we're seeing that in our country right now and across the world. Like, just look at the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Putin had a come to Jesus moment, some conservative evangelical moment, and he's calling Zelensky a Nazi. So he's leveraging anti-Semitism against his own people and using his theology to justify the war. And in my opinion, bad theology kills. And Putin is embodying bad theology.
Yeah. Well, and then and then throw out his, the Russian Orthodox Church's assertion that,
right.
Ukraine has gone too far European. They're too inclusive. They're too, friendly towards the gay community. Now suddenly you have what should be an institution that is the bulwark against that kind of stuff.
Right.
Who was actually just climbed right into bed with the Russian Empire to slaughter and kill.
Yeah.
So you're right. Bad theology does kill on a homegrown level, on a more micro level for us. Bad theology kills as we see people inside of your community at a higher risk for suicide and self-harm and other kinds of behaviors that are risky simply because they're not allowed to fully express who they are, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it feels so close to home because, I'm in my mid 40s now. And when I look back 20 years ago, I could ask the questions about gender. Yeah. It made some people uncomfortable, but I wasn't scared for my life like I am now.
Yeah.
And when I think about young people who are in their teens and in their 20s, especially young people whose parents could go to prison for life for advocating for their kids to have some kind of gender affirming care. It's really scary. And first it was abortion and now it's trans kids. And it feels very scary that the state wants to control bodies in the same way that religious institutions have controlled bodies for millennia. And if we don't see a connection there, and if we don't see the overlap of empire and religion, we're missing something.
Well, and it's just so damn idiotic of these people. It wasn't that many months ago that these people, when they were told they might have to get jabbed in the arm, are screaming at the top are screaming at the top of their lungs, "My body, my choice."
Right.
And they don't see the irony in the bullshit that they're spewing when it comes to now the LGBTQIA community and not giving them the power to also say, "This is my body, my choice."
Right.
And it's just, I mean, it's beyond ironic. It's beyond stupid. It's beyond fucked up. It's beyond scary.
Yeah.
I think we could diagnose this though, John. Robyn, what do you think? We can diagnose this because, when a lot of people, when they're diagnosed when they first have an inkling, they might have COVID. What do they lose? They lose their sense of smell. I think you can diagnose yourself as a fundamentalist when you start to begin to lose your sense of irony.
Right.
like all your self-awareness just goes like, all of a sudden you just go, oh shit, I can no longer sense irony. I might have fundamentalism. That would be a problem, and you should probably go get that treated.
Yeah.
I mean, but you have the laws that you're talking about, and at the same time, you have what's going on in Florida, right? With the invasive, the invasion into the curriculum, even
right.
They're calling that the "Don't Say Gay" bill, right? Where you're not supposed to even. So, how is it? Do you think that we are just? And I don't think carte blanche are doing this, but in certain places in the country, you see, I just see it's going backwards.
Yeah.
And it scares me because all the progress that I feel like we made in the last 10 or 12 or 15 years, they are very, very quickly trying to unravel.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the ways in which politics have regressed, I think we saw this in the 80s when Reagan was president and Bush followed. Then you had some headway with Clinton, but Clinton criminalized drug use.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And filled the prisons with black and brown people. And then you have George W. Bush, who accelerated the war in Iraq. And then maybe we made a little bit of strides with Obama, but Obama
he loved his drones.
Yeah, and he removed lots of immigrants.
Yeah.
He deported more people, right? So we need to look at this in context and really consider, yes, it was a triumph to have a Black president, but in exchange for having a Black president, we get more deportations, we get more drone warfare. And so, what's the cost benefit analysis here? Are these two parties what we need for human flourishing? I don't think so. For me, every time I vote, it's choosing the better of two evils, because when you look at it on paper, Republicans and Democrats look a lot of the same. They vote very similarly. The military budget for Democrats is less than the Republicans, but, things look very similar. And I'm just like, well, I don't think that's working for us. And it's all part of empire religion. And so how do we untangle ourselves from the bullshit and actually provide a political structure for a governance that will create conditions for flourishing? That's my question.
Yeah. And I tell you what, from where I sit, I just don't know if it's possible. It just seems like the whole damn thing is so corrupt. And you're right. It's like the further they tack one way or the other, they're always trying to tack towards the middle anyway.
Right.
So, even our current president is, every time he's attacked for being too liberal, he tacks to the right and says, well, yeah, but I'm still going to drill in the Arctic wildlife refuge. I'm still going to, he would still, I guarantee, support some sort of military conflict if he felt like it would, advance his goals. So I don't know. I don't think we're going to see any sort of political solution, but at the same time, this ebb and flow thing, doesn't it seem like it just gets exhausting? I mean, it's
completely.
And if it's exhausting for me as one who doesn't really, I have skin in the game because I have people that I care about and I love about who are in those communities. But if it's exhausting for me, I don't know what the word is for y'all. What's beyond exhausting?
Yeah, it's really crippling in lots of ways. When I look here in Nashville and I see that there are no affordable housing for anyone unless you can take a mortgage out of like $750,000.
Yeah.
It's just it's untenable. We're in untenable times.
Yeah. I worry for my kids who are in their 20s now.
Yeah.
And who are, trying to do that thing of, that so-called American dream where we're supposed to get married and have kids and buy houses. And, some of those things seem very out of reach for them,
Right.
And, so yeah. And then, like you said, add to that, the myriad problems that come along with government overreach and them starting to get, I don't know. At some point, I wish they would just decide that they'd no longer give a shit about what people do with their personal lives.
Right.
And maybe focusing on things that actually, like you said, would help human flourishing. How about that? Mm-hmm. And stop making these divisions and all these, sort of black and white and binary choices and trying to stick everyone into a box. But before we forget, too, I don't want to get too far down the conversation before we forget to mention that you've got a book coming out and we want to talk about that. So that's by the time this airs, it may have been released. But talk to us about the book. What is the title of your book?
Yeah, the book is called Body Becoming, A Path to Our Liberation. And, it was my attempt to try to recover the body as a way to rethink democracy. And so sort of the argument is that trans embodiment is a vision for democracy and that we can learn a lot from getting into our bodies. And you don't have to be transgender to envision democracy, but you do have to have a good relationship with your body in order to be in right relationship with others so that we can create a cultural body that can shape and shift our democratic body. And so I share stories in the book about, what bodies count, what is a body, how do we rethink bodies in an age of terror and surveillance? How do we be in right relationship with people? What does it mean to have a felt sense of our bodies? So many so many white folks are disconnected from their bodies, or they disassociate. And this is part of a culture of whiteness. So many white people are disconnected from their ancestral heritage. And so I want to try to encourage people to suture the wounds of their ancestral lineage. Get into your body. You know, living life is more than just living from the shoulders up. Living life is a fully embodied aspiration, and it's expressed in community. And so how do we create community with ourselves and with each other? Because, you know, when I look around, I see a lot of people who are wondering, like they want to do the right thing. They want to be the right anti-racist person, but they don't have the embodied awareness on how to do that. And so I'm hoping that this book connects the dots for folks and helps them have an embodied awareness and not just talking points, and not just like, oh, I have my one Black friend who teaches me everything, but there is a real embodied awareness on how to be better, how to do better.
Nat and I recently talked to Lisa Sharon Harper about her recent book, and it was an eye-opening moment when, you know, if we talked about this idea that white people have lost their culture.
Yeah,
white people have replaced it with this idea of whiteness.
Right.
That the idea of whiteness is now more important than where I came from.
Right.
To the point where I have the ability to find my history. Whereas in some of my African siblings don't, or African American siblings don't, right? They have been separated from their history to the point where they don't know. But we have chosen whiteness over the ability to learn about my own culture.
Right.
And so one of the things that was brought up was just this idea of like a census, right? Where you write down, or anything, any piece of paper where you write down your ethnicity. I check the box that says white, right? I don't check a box that says Irish American.
Yeah.
I don't check a box that says whatever. But every other race has to choose a box that's connected to their ethnicity.
Yeah.
Whereas whiteness has controlled us to the point where I'm just white.
Yeah.
With no culture to back that up other than, well, the scary racist shit that we've built around it, right?
Typical stuff like you got no rhythm and you can't jump, but that's different. That's actually, for me, it's very true. But yeah, I mean, that's so when you say disconnected from our own bodies, that's kind of where I was. That's where I landed too. I immediately thought of Lisa Sharon Harper's our conversation with her, where she was talking about whiteness as a construct, you know, as really a mythology of this way to.
Well, and then on top of that, then whiteness as normative, right?
Right.
Everything else is put in comparison to whiteness. Whiteness becomes the norm.
Right.
But then from a political standpoint too, Robyn, don't you see this too, that whiteness becomes a voting block?
Oh, absolutely.
And we see this in the election of the Donald, when we see that 83% of white male I actually think just white evangelicals in general voted for this person who is the antithesis, really, of anything Christian or evangelical. But as a block, they kind of moved in lockstep to support this person.
And in my first book, Activist Theology, I talk about that being the white hegemonic block.
Yeah.
That it's not just a white block, it's hegemonic.
Right.
And that harms people.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, because doesn't it, I mean, on the one hand, it really creates a false majority.
Right.
Because all of a sudden now you have everybody collected up into this one big voting block you call white. And now they look like that's most of us. When in reality, there's not a clear majority there except by this construct, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and the harm comes in when what John just said, which is echoing again what Lisa Sharon Harper mentioned, is that the harm comes in and that becomes normative.
Right.
That becomes the thing to which and by which we compare everything else. And so, it's just, I'm not sure, the harm goes deep and it's complex.
Well, and the harm then is weaponized against those who are different. So I think there are layers to this, or tiers to it. And I think we need to be mindful that whiteness as a construct, it is socially constructed, and there's power there, and religion is complicit in this. I mean, I call what we're seeing right now Christofascism, which is what Dorothy Zule talked about in the rise of Adolf Hitler. Where, history repeats itself. I always heard that growing up, and I never did quite understand it. But this country, white people in particular, don't have a historical memory because they're so disconnected from their roots. And there's so much cultural trauma for white folks. And we need to be clear that many of us don't have a historical memory. I mean, my family migrated from Mexico, and because of whiteness, I don't have access to that history. And we see history repeating itself almost on steroids.
Yeah.
And I think what we're going to see in the case of Russia and Ukraine is another genocide of white on white violence. And we need to remember that racism comes from European white on white violence. So this is another example of history repeating itself, and empire religion, just like Constantine endorsed it, Putin is accelerating it. And this country, there's an acceleration of empire religion. And, I like to call myself a Jesus follower. I like Jesus. I like the teachings of Jesus. And if we were more attuned to the teachings of Jesus than the dogma of religious institutions, we would be a different people.
Oh, 100%.
But we're not. And so therefore we are not.
Well, and we're in a position now where Vladimir Putin can come along and quote scripture.
Right.
And justify his war by saying, no greater love has a man than he lay his life down. Like, what the hell are you doing? And let's not let the church off the hook, because the Russian Orthodox Church is complicit in all of this, as they have justified and, promulgated this propaganda.
Well, and follow the money.
Yeah,
exactly. Sadly, that's exactly true.
I mean, oligarchy is present in this country too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Follow the money here too.
I've worked in the oil industry for many years. Talk about an oligarchy. I mean, talk about corporate, interest that is just enormous. But yeah, the money's the thing. And when you look at, so you say, you mentioned history repeating itself, and we've had this conversation at least one or two times before, but I see this war in Ukraine, this travesty that's happening and unfolding, where, it reminds me of what happened in Nazi Germany, where you see the church not just advocating their responsibility to be anti-violent and vocally anti-war, but actually being proponents of the war. And so, the confessing church in Germany was a tiny, tiny fraction of the larger evangelical church in Germany, who all either went along without protest or joyfully entered in to the Holocaust. And so, sadly, it doesn't seem like we've learned a damn thing.
Well, like Nat and I have actually mentioned this before. Nat and I have talked about this. I could go online and grab you some quotes from Hitler and post it, but don't put his name on it. And not only would I get likes for it, I would probably get amens, because he did the same damn thing too.
Right.
He used his Christian agenda to start off his war against the Jews. So we didn't learn from that, because Putin's now doing the same damn shit.
Right.
And we have people on Fox News. We have people within the Republican Party. We have people within our own evangelical churches praising this guy as a God-fearing Christian who's just doing the right thing and saving us from the horrors of the LGBTQ plus community, right?
Right.
And, just saving the heart of America. Oh my God, it makes me sick. Just
again, that hegemony comes into play, doesn't it? I mean, would you agree, Robyn? That's the ultimate thing here, is we're trying to protect our power.
Oh, most certainly. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that seems like at the end of the day, you can kind of narrow it down to the money and the power, the influence.
I mean, I just did an IG Live with Joe Lumen, and she asked me, can power ever be healthy? And I said, well, yes, and there has to be some humility when you're close to power or have proximity to power, because it's intoxicating. And when you don't have right relationship with power, and when you aren't in community, then it's very easy to get duped by power. Look at people who, become celebrities, and even in the progressive religious circles. I mean, this is why I only have 5,000 followers and not 20,000 followers, because I say things like this, like, I'm not interested in celebrity culture, and I'm not interested in being a talking head. I'm interested in being in relationship, because relationship is what will save us. And there's so many people who are hell-bent on worshiping the all-American dollar and getting money and making that coin, that they're willing to forsake community for the sake of power and control. And I think that's bad theology. I mean, I have watched some of my colleagues ascend to power within these Christian circuits, and they're not distributing any money to people. They're making six figures on book deals. They're not distributing money to those who are in need. And the Activist Theology Project that I launched based on my scholarship, we have a whole reparations model that whatever we earn, we give back 10%, and then we distribute to people in need here in Tennessee. And if we continue to grow, then we will continue to give more. And that is what I'm invested in. Like, how do we distribute or redistribute our money in a way to help create community and flourishing community, instead of just hoarding it to ourselves?
So you're a bad capitalist, is what you're saying.
I am. I'm a bad capitalist.
So what you're saying is, so let me see if I hear you. So you're saying that the accumulation of wealth is not the point of all of this.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Ah, shit. Okay. Well, I gotta rethink some things. But that's symptomatic though of the culture. Look at, and it makes me sick, because I grew up in evangelical Christianity, and for a very long time, I'm here to tell you, I'll own that I wanted very badly to be part of that.
Sure.
Because the power is intoxicating.
Sure.
It's not power in the sense of like I have control over people. It's the power of recognition.
Right.
It's the power of affirmation, of validation. And suddenly you're inside of a church model where, more people coming to your church, more people coming to hear you speak. All that is validate.
Right.
Well, I must be doing something right. All these people are coming to see me.
Right.
And it's so ass backwards. But
it's also narcissistic.
Oh, it's 100% narcissistic. My friend Caleb, who I've mentioned several times, who I love dearly, walked away from all of this stuff. And his mantra is the stage is just the stage is intoxicating. And it I don't care if it's a 2-foot platform or a 3-inch platform, or if you're anything that elevates you a little bit suddenly is like, oh, if you're not careful, man, that is an aphrodisiac,
right?
And suddenly you're willing to do what it takes to keep that sensation. It is an addiction,
right?
So yeah, but it's one that I feel like if we're truly followers of Christ, we've got to lay that down.
Mm-hmm.
Then that has to be something we probably do fairly regularly.
100%.
Sometimes we pick it up and not even realize we picked it back up. And like, oh shit, I'm still carrying this thing.
Let me give you an example.
Sure.
So I have a platform, which I have a love-hate relationship with it. And I started talking with Derek Webb on Instagram and
I
Twitter.
love Derek Webb.
Yeah, great guy. And Derek gave me his telephone number. So now, because telephone numbers, it means you have some proximity.
That's proximity,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now I have to be very mindful about how I engage in this connection.
Mm.
And I have to be wise as a serpent.
Yeah.
Because what if Derek and I do an event together? How do we steward that time? Because I want to compost platform culture. And I want to do collaborations and conversations with people. Like, I want to come to San Angelo and hang out with you in your coffee shop.
That would be amazing. You should do that.
I don't want to be at some cathedral speaking, right? I want to be with the people.
But that's not the way Christian celebrity or celebrity in general works.
Right.
It's not compost. It's how can I stand out, be above, be isolated, and be somehow revered. John and I have wrestled with this a little bit too, because we've had some people on the podcast who are fairly well known, and we do get a little giddy sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I've got Brian Don's phone number, and I could call Brad Jersak tomorrow, and he would come on. You know what I'm saying? There is a little bit of that. And if it's that intoxicating on that small a level, and that's just Brad Jersak, I'm saying you're small potatoes, but but I can't even imagine what it's like to have Bono's phone number.
Right.
What's it like to share a stage with some, I remember I read something about somebody who had served, I don't know, I think it was Mick Jagger had come into a hotel or a restaurant or something like that. And they were asking about, well, what's he like? Is he normal? And they're like, no, he's fucking weird.
Yeah.
There's no way. And they were like, and the point was like, there's no way you can live the life that guy lives, be catered to on the level that you are catered to, have everything sort of revolve around you and be anything remotely normal.
Right.
Within his sphere, I guess he's a nice enough guy. But to the average person, it would be like, what's that? That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the intoxication of power is a real thing.
Well, and isn't it, we all feel like if we were given the opportunity and we were, because we were raised different, and then we were just handed all this money and prestige and power that, we would do it different. We'd be better with it. And I don't think we would.
I'm willing to give it a shot though, John. So I'm just saying, I'm willing to be wrong about this. So if anybody wants to donate $1 million, that'd be great.
We could just test drive the idea. We can split the $1 million. Okay,
yeah. We'll see how you do and how I do.
Exactly.
And at the end of it all, when I'm broke and sad, which is almost guaranteed to be the case.
Right.
But I will have a Tesla that I won't be able to charge anymore because I will have lost my house with the charging station.
Exactly. Well, so, you hear about all these people who win the lottery.
Oh, yeah.
And they go bankrupt because they actually don't know how to, they don't know how to be with that much money.
Right.
I think the same thing is true for people with access to power. We don't know how to be in relationship with power. So we become narcissists.
Yeah.
And we step onto an accelerated platform and we like the spotlight. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'm a Leo. And so you would think that I love the spotlight, but I actually don't love the spotlight. I mean, I like to be the center of attention when I'm in my family.
Yeah.
But not when I'm on a stage. I want to share the stage with people. I want to be in conversation, which is so antithetical to the norms of today's speaking circuit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're never going to get anywhere out there if you're not willing to step on some folks to get there, right?
Right.
I mean, that's, I don't know. Like I said, that any dalliance I had with, any kind of, anything in that world is long. It's lost its luster. But I'm not naive enough to think it couldn't rear its ugly head again.
Right.
I mean, if the opportunity came up tomorrow, who were we talking to? Who was the singer?
Amy Quartz.
Yeah. Amy Quartz, had at one point had been recording and doing some things, and she got to go on tour with some fairly big name Christian singers. And I knew a couple of those names, and even in just the conversation, like, oh, that must have been so cool.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, dude, you're just like, you're like falling for that thing again, But, yeah, it's something that, I don't know. It's so pervasive inside of, especially Western evangelical culture, that I'm not sure how I guess we just root it out slowly but surely, but I don't know. It's very strange indeed. Because for me, I don't want to say theology because it's not my theology, but my perspectives change. They change in relationships with people. They change as I get to know people that are outside of my normal experience. And I start to go, okay, well, I have more in common with that person than I thought I did.
Yeah.
And so these conversations, that's why I think these conversations are so important. Because it's easy to imagine that somebody who's trans or somebody who's whatever you imagine them a certain way because you don't actually have any firsthand experience with anybody. And then suddenly you meet them, you discuss, John will tell his story, has told his story about being in theater in the 80s as a teenager. And all of a sudden, this group of people that had been demonized by the churches we were raised in, suddenly turns out they're great.
Mm-hmm.
And that no longer fits anymore with what we've been told. Yeah. And all of a sudden you start to, as you begin to actually have relationships, you begin to care about people. Those relationships begin to take priority over whatever ideology you think you have, right?
Well, which is why I always say it's relationships all the way down for me.
Yeah, it has to be, right?
If we don't know how to be in relationship with each other, then we certainly don't know how and won't know how to be in relationship with power. You know, community helps regulate the allure of power. And when we are better in community with people, then we are better leaders. I think I'm in a community with women of color and queer women of color, and we trust each other and we speak the truth to each other, and we're each leading in our different ways, but we're all committed to composting platform culture. And so I think, we have a shared vision of another possible world, and, we can do things in decolonial ways. We can decentralize the self or the celebrity, and we can do things through a politics of togetherness, and a better world emerges when we do that.
Well, and for us as white, middle-aged, hetero, whatever you want to call us, one of the things that I've had to learn is to shut the fuck up. My group has had their voice out in front for a very long time, and we have done nothing but demonize, destroy, hurt, colonize, build empire. I mean, we need to get the fuck out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting that here my brother and I are running this podcast, right? But it's just another platform for us to reach out to people who have a lot to teach us.
Yeah,
but we have to be willing to ignore what we were taught, ignore what was pushed down our throats, and say, okay, maybe there are other stories out there, which there are, by the way, that are way more important than this whitewashed version that we have been taught. I mean, it's only been in the last. I'm going to be generous to myself and say it's only been in the last 5 years that I've heard a lot of these stories of African American communities, of the Latinx community, the BIPOC community, right?
Yeah.
Of the LGBTQIA communities, that I'm like, oh shit, I never knew any of this.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of this. And it's our job to find this information. We've talked about this before with other people on the, it's not your job. It's not my one Black friend's job to teach me all of Black history.
Right.
We have to take the time to reach out and find this. It's available. We have the internet. It's not that hard anymore to get out there and find this history, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's my go-to thing. That's amazing, John. No, I find myself always in a place where I'm not sure exactly. I'm overwhelmed. There's a lot of information, and I like it all. It's really it's helpful. So if you could give advice to someone like John or me, as far as, I guess, just getting better educated and better acquainted with the issues that are surrounding your community in particular, I mean, what would be some writers besides yourself that you would point us towards, or some resources would you advise?
Well, certainly Joe Lumen out in California and San Diego, and Alicia Crosby in North Carolina. Those are two people I think of just off the top of my head. And I would also say, if you care about issues that impact people like me or my friends, then I would hope that your friendships look like the issues you care about.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. That is a very good point. So often that's I find myself, I look up and around and I see I've surrounded myself with people like me.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that. I think part of that is just human nature. I think we seek out sameness, but there has to be some intentionality to say, hey, listen, I can't know about this community if I haven't befriended anyone in that community. And to do so, this is one thing that always used to bug me about evangelicals. And when I was one, we were always told to go out and make friends so that,
right.
you know, it was always an agenda, you know, like it was this sort of like we wanted to, you know, evangelize and proselytize, but you had to make friends. And so the purpose of the friendship was simply, it was an avenue to get them to come to church or do something else. So, for no other reason other than just to befriend somebody and maybe learn something about their culture and about what, you know, the kinds of things that they experience. We've got to step outside of ourselves, I think. And I think you're exactly right about that. Yeah. So that's good advice.
Well, I think also it's one thing to say that you are affirming of, you know, whatever group you're talking about. But if you're not willing to stand, okay, so say you are a pastor of a church, if you're not willing to stand up in front of your congregation and say the things that are happening to this group of people or this group of people is absolutely wrong, and I'm standing here to tell you that this is not okay, you aren't creating a safe space for them. Right. You're just not. Right. So I can say I'm affirming all day long, but if I'm not willing to stand up and say, okay, these laws that are being passed in these states, you know, one right after the other, it's scary as shit.
Right.
I mean, this is going to cause harm. I mean, so much harm to a group of people who, well, I obviously don't deserve it.
Well, and they're already marginalized, and you're going to further marginalize.
They're already marginalized. They're already told that they have no worth. They don't matter. And now we're putting them in a place where they are going to get, we've seen the violence rising, you know, and it's not only self-harm. We talk about that, you know, the mere depression of watching these laws go into place is causing self-harm, but it's also emboldening these bigots, these racists to come out of the woodworks again, which I think for a while, I don't think they were ever gone. You know, sadly, I don't think they were. You know, I think that they were hiding, and someone like 45 has given them the authority or whatever you want to call it to come out and just be openly violent again. Yeah. And it's scary as shit, and we need to talk about it. And if we aren't willing to talk about it and stand in the gap, we aren't making a safe space. We just aren't.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, I'm excited for the book. I just added it to my Amazon shopping cart.
Oh, thank you.
So I do this a lot when I'm talking to someone and go, "Ooh, I haven't gotten this book yet." So I'm literally sitting and go, "Okay, click, it's happening." I am excited. Body becoming a pathway or a path to our liberation. Right?
Yeah.
I tell you what, if I could be so bold as to give people like me advice, it would be to read outside of your normal routine. You know, maybe pick up a book by somebody who John and I have talked lately about trying to find some Native American perspectives, you know, some indigenous perspectives, something else outside of my own experience to say, okay, there's more going on here than what has happened in our little bubbles for the last 30, 40 years. So I would highly recommend, having not read it, I guarantee, just based on this conversation, I guarantee it's going to be an excellent read and you're going to learn something from it. It's going to give you an opportunity to expand your perspectives and expand your mind a little bit. So for that, I appreciate you for coming onto the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. And if you're looking for sort of Native theology, Native American theology, Vine Deloria's God is Red is really good.
Okay, that's actually, I'm typing it in.
I actually think that's on my
getting bigger.
I think that's actually on my reading list already. I'm almost positive it is.
Cool.
I have purposely for the last 2 years read almost everything I've read has been either from the BIPOC community or from LGBTQ community.
Cool.
I have basically submerged myself into that fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, very cool.
There is some amazing. I just finished an African science fiction trilogy. It's just, I think the first one's called Binti, but it's just like, it just blows my mind. I'm like, why didn't I didn't know about any of these authors. It's just so amazing. You know, just taking the time to do a little research, find some other voices out there and hear their stories. Right. And it can't not change your heart. It can't. It really can't. You're gonna find yourself connecting with these people from different ethnicities, different races, different groups that you didn't know their story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing. And yeah, your book is going to be on that list now.
Thank you.
And the invitation, of course, to come to West Texas, because I know, do you still have family in Abilene? Do you still have folks around us?
No, I don't.
Okay. Let's say, if you had an excuse to come to Texas, and just come on, pop down here.
Well, I'm always happy to come to Texas because I miss the food and the hospitality. So,
oh man, we got a Whataburger on every corner.
Yeah, you don't have to ask twice for me to come to Texas.
Okay, all right. I think we need to make that happen. I would very, very much enjoy that.
Yeah,
that would be great.
Let's make it happen.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yes.
We're going to have all the links to your information and the book that is, I guess, getting released next week, right?
Next week, yeah.
Okay, so woohoo! That's soon, but we'll have links to that as well. I highly recommend that you dive into some of this work. It's going to prove to be, I think, life-changing for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
So for all of that, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming. It's been an honor and a whole lot of fun.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
It's good to meet y'all. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.